North Korea fired 4 short-range ballistic missiles into the sea today, according to the South Korean military, the latest in a blitz of weapons launches by Pyongyang this week. And Twitter sacking half of its 7,500-strong staff as new owner Elon Musk launches a major overhaul of the troubled company just a week after his blockbuster takeover. And extreme weather event coming out of the U.S., multiple tornadoes touching down across Texas. And post-pandemic recovery and the ongoing crisis in Myanmar will be the main issues to be raised by President Marcos Jr. during his participation in the 40th and 41st Association of Southeast Asian Nations Summits in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, next week. First in our news, North Korea again fired 4 short-range ballistic missiles into the sea today. According to the South Korean military, this is the latest in a blitz of weapons launches by Pyongyang this week. The South Korean military detected 4 short-range ballistic missiles launched by North Korea from Tonrim, North Pyongan province to the West Sea at around 11:32 a.m. to 11:59 a.m. today, according to South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff in a statement. Their flight distance was detected at about 130 kilometers, an altitude of about 20 kilometers, and a speed of about Mach 5. It added, Mach 5 represents 5 times the speed of sound. The JCS said South Korean and U.S. intelligence were conducting further analysis on the launches. Meanwhile, a U.S. B-1B strategic bomber will participate in the ongoing joint air drills with South Korea today, according to a Defense Ministry official in Seoul, a show of force after a blitz of missile launches by North Korea. The show of force came a day after South Korea scrambled fighter jets, including F-35s, in response to what it said was a swarm of 180 North Korean warplanes. U.S. pilots are in South Korea for a joint military training exercise. And such exercises have long infuriated North Korea, which sees them as rehearsals for an invasion. Pyongyang had called Vigilant Storm an aggressive and provocative military drill targeting North Korea, and said the U.S. and South Korea would, quote, pay the most horrible price in history if they continued. And Kim Jong-un's regime demanding a halt to the exercises, warning the U.S. should not act rashly, and those threats now a part of daily life in Seoul. Take a look.
여기서 미사일 발사된 줄 몰랐걸랑. 몰라서 있는데 그때 한 9시쯤 됐는데 그 사이렌이 막 울리더라고. 한 2, 3분 동안 울리더니.
그리고 또 이 텔레비 보고 저희가 알았고 이제 대피를 어떻게 해야 될지 저희도 이제 언론군이나 이제 저희 언론도에는 이런 게 또 처음이다 보니까 생소했고 그다음에 대피도 이런 것도 전혀 생각도 못했고 이런 상황이라서
서해 5도, 병영도와는 달리 울릉도는 그래도 좀 아직 안전한 곳으로 인식되고 이런 경우는 또 처음이고 사이렌만 들어서는 이게 공습 경보인지 다른 안 그러면 뭐 다른 그 훈련인지 참 구분하기도 어렵고 그래서 우리가 처음에는 좀 약간 당황스러웠죠, 그렇죠. 누가 사람이 배를 눌러서 경보가 울리는 게 아니고 시스템상 바로 이제 경보가 울린 것 같습니다. 자동적으로 울렸기 때문에 중앙부처라든가 행안부라든가 뭐 국방부라든가 어디서 안 가면 도청이라든가 이런 데서 우리한테 공습 경보라고 별도로 알려진 건 없고 이래서 이제 우리가 말 방송이라든지 울릉 알림이라는 앱이 있습니다. 거기서 휴대폰으로도 볼 수 있도록 그렇게 알리고 최대한 우리가 이제 여러 가지 알릴 수 있는 그런 방법을 통해서 알렸다는 이런 말씀입니다. 그리고 또 직접 직원들이 또 마을에 또 나갈 수 있는 대로 나가서 주민들한테 설명도 하고 또 나가도록 안내도 했는데 이 많은 분들이 일부터 다 만족스럽지는 않고 또 국민들 요새 이제 기대 수준에 다들 좀 부족하지 않았나 이렇게 싶습니다.
And we had this, we were just going about, touring some tourist areas, and all of a sudden we received these messages, alarming messages, and everybody was scared, like what is going on? And then we realized that it's the missile launch by Korea, North Korea, which is just crazy. Everybody was like, what do we do here? It's a small island, we cannot hide, we cannot do anything.
I wasn't really worried or scared or anything, because I feel like living in Seoul, we're so close to the border that maybe we've been desensitized to these threats. It's like a toddler having a tantrum is kind of the perspective.
Now, North Korea is particularly sensitive about the drills from southern U.S., according to experts, as its Air Force is one of the weakest links in its military, lacking high-tech jets and properly trained pilots. Pyongyang has been particularly angered in the past by the deployment of U.S. strategic weapons such as B-1Bs and aircraft carrier strike groups, which have been deployed to and near the Korean Peninsula in times of high tension. At the UN Security Council, meanwhile, the United States accused China and Russia of protecting North Korea.
The DPRK, however, has enjoyed blanket protection from two members of this council. These members have bent over backwards to justify the DPRK's repeated violations, and in turn, they have enabled the DPRK and made a mockery of this council. This cannot stand.
U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield also dismissed criticism of the drills with South Korea as North Korean propaganda and said they pose no threat to other countries. But China said North Korea's closest ally, and Russia, whose relations with the West have severely deteriorated over its invasion of Ukraine, placed the blame on the United States. Take a look.
From its sources.
We've heard these two council members claim the United States and the Republic of Korea have stoked tensions on the Korean Peninsula with military exercises. This is nothing but a regurgitation of DPRK propaganda and a misleading narrative. The United States and the Republic of Korea are engaging in long-standing defensive military exercises that pose no threat to anyone, never mind the DPRK.
我们呼吁美方停止单方面宣言紧张对抗的做法，负起责任，拿出行动，体现诚意，切实回应曹方正当合理关切，为重启有意义的对话创造有利条件。
Now, the ongoing joint drills involve some of South Korea and America's advanced fighter jets, F-35As and F-35Bs, both of which are stealth aircraft designed to produce as small a radar signature as possible. And such jets would be a central component in any decapitation operations targeting the North Korean leadership, including Kim Jong-un himself, according to Go Myung-yoon, a researcher at the Asian Institute for Policy Studies. Earlier this year, there were reports that U.S. and South Korean commandos were practicing so-called decapitation strikes, the removal of North Korea's top leadership in a lightning-fast military operation. Meanwhile, the United States and South Korea have warned that these launches could culminate in a nuclear test by North Korea. Take a look.
This year is marked by the tension between Beijing and Washington, as well as the war in Ukraine. And as a result, the United Nations Security Council, which can impose sanctions on North Korea for its misbehavior, is highly dysfunctional. so North Korea can carry out these kind of provocations without worrying about the consequences. First, we have seen this before in the past months. North Korea was testing its short-range ballistic missiles, and it has graduated to much larger and powerful systems. So if you extrapolate this dynamic, then it's only natural to anticipate that North Korea is going to climax this cycle with a nuclear test. I think that they have observed that the current air drills called the Vigilant Storm involves highly capable fifth-generation stealth fighters such as the F-35As on the South Korean side and F-35B on the US side. And these are highly capable aircraft fighters that can fly under the radar and without detection. So it would be a central component in any decapitation operations targeting the North Korean leadership, including Kim Jong-un himself. And we know for a fact that North Korea is highly sensitive to these kind of threats that target their leadership.
In Manila, meanwhile, the Department of Foreign Affairs on Friday denounced North Korea's flurry of ballistic missile tests, one of which landed near the South Korean waters on Wednesday, further escalating tension in the region. The DFA urged Pyongyang to return to dialogue, as it called on all parties to exercise utmost restraint. It also called on North Korea to comply with its obligations under the relevant UN Security Council resolutions and to commit to the process of constructive and peaceful dialogue with the South. This is the fourth statement the Philippine government issued on the North Korea situation this year, according to Foreign Affairs Assistant Secretary Neil Imperial. Foreign Affairs Assistant Secretary for ASEAN Affairs Daniel Espiritu added that the Southeast Asian bloc's position on the weapons tests has also been consistent and clear. In tonight's other news, amid fears of an attack coming from their northern border with Belarus and Russia, Ukraine's border guards are fortifying their positions. From there, on the first day of the invasion by Moscow's forces, the Russian 90th Armored Division slammed into this part of Ukrainian territory like butter. Take a look.
Це МЛАВ, протитанковий ракетний комплекс шведсько-британського виробництва. Тут було масштабне вторгнення, саме на ділянці Чернівського прикордонного загону через пункт пропуску Сеньківка з метою посилення державного кордону, також облаштування інженерних споруджень, як я вже казав, з метою не допустити вторгнення, а якщо воно повторно відбудеться на даній ділянці, то зупинити ворога саме на лінії державного кордону, не дати їм просунутися вглиб нашої країни.
Звичайно, така загроза є, тому що Білорусь непередбачувана ситуація в Білорусі. Там є російські війська, і ми це знаємо, всі це знають. Поведінка білоруського керівництва не зрозуміла зовсім, тому...
Верніться так спиною.
Ні, ви просто почекайте, він підготується. Метрів на 10 максимум виходите, не далі. Окей?
In early April, the Russians pulled back from the north only to refocus on the campaign in eastern and southern Ukraine. And since then, Ukraine has been watching Senkivka like a hawk, as well as its nearly 900 kilometers of border with Belarus, whose territory served as a rear base for Moscow's forces. On October 20, Ukraine's military said the threat of a renewed offensive from the north was growing, flagging intensified aggressive rhetoric from its northern neighbors who are close allies. Several days earlier, Minsk said up to 9,000 Russian soldiers and some 170 tanks would be deployed to Belarus as part of a joint task force to secure its borders. Meanwhile, the United States is accusing Russia of wanting to freeze Ukraine into submission since it has failed to triumph on the battlefield. Moscow is pushing ahead with moving thousands of civilians out of the occupied Kherson region. Take a look.
Russia's destroyed some 40% of Ukraine's energy infrastructure, including thermal energy plants that provide many Ukrainian homes, schools, hospitals, with heat in the wintertime, when temperatures can drop to 20 degrees below Celsius. President Putin seems to have decided that if he can't seize Ukraine by force, he will try to freeze it into submission.
Людей лише станом на цей вечір від споживання тимчасово відключені за аварійними і стабілізаційними графіками близько 4,5 мільйонів споживачів.
Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russia's campaign against Ukraine's energy network had left around 4.5 million people without power. And the West vowed to assist Ukraine to rebuild after the damage by Moscow's strike. Now, the top diplomats from the Club of Rich Nations agreed a structure to funnel aid to Ukraine to replace infrastructure targeted by Russia after they held 2 days of talks in Munster. The U.S., which has already committed to more than $18.2 billion of security aid to Ukraine since the invasion began in February, is also examining options to address the damage. And speaking to volunteers on National Unity Day, Russian President Vladimir Putin says Moscow has exceeded mobilization targets since he ordered the military call-up last September. Take a look.
Кто находится в Европе, там ходят по ресторанам и требуют себе скидок, а у нас люди просятся на работу. Да. Из 300 тысяч мобилизованных у нас 318 тысяч. Да. Почему 318? Потому что добровольцы идут. Количество добровольцев, оно не сокращается. Мы сегодня отмечаем День народного единства, и вот эти предметы материальной культуры, которые подтверждают весь ход исторических событий, которые связаны с этой землей, с этими людьми прежде всего, они очень важны для того, чтобы люди, которые жили в течение 30 лет, да, в условиях какой-то сумасшедшей, абсолютно идиотской националистической пропаганды, чтобы понимали, откуда они родом.
On September 21, President Putin announced the start of a partial military mobilization, the country's first enlistment since World War II. In late October, the Defense Ministry announced the draft's completion, saying that 300,000 reservists had been called up. Tens of thousands of Russians, meanwhile, rushed to leave the country after President Putin launched an attack on Ukraine on February 24. A second wave left after President Putin announced a mobilization of 300,000 reservists on September 21. And now to the shockwaves from the war in Ukraine. This week, grain shipments from Ukraine resumed after Russia returned to a deal allowing their safe passage following internal or international pressure. But Moscow said it had yet to decide whether to extend the grain deal beyond November 19, the renewal date written into the original agreement brokered by the UN and Turkey to stave off a global food emergency. This could worsen the hunger crisis all over the world. Let's listen in.
WFP has massively scaled up our response in Somalia with the support of the international community. But the hunger and nutrition crisis is still very severe, especially in places like Baidoa, where we're still in a desperate race against time to avert looming famine. Unfortunately, despite incredible efforts, there's still so much to be done. We are only at the beginning of this crisis, and I fear the worst is yet to come.
Now, Russian president this week threatened to stop ships full of staple food bound for Africa. Last week, Russia quit the deal for 4 days over a drone attack on its Black Sea fleet in Crimea. But Moscow resumed its participation in the agreement on Wednesday after saying it had received security guarantees from Ukraine on demilitarizing a maritime corridor. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Moscow's return doesn't mean it would necessarily decide to extend the deal later this month. But on Friday, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said Russia and Turkey have reached an agreement to deliver grain free of charge to countries in need, including Djibouti, Somalia, and Sudan. The impoverished Horn of Africa nation is on the brink of famine for the second time in just over a decade, with UN humanitarian chief Martin Griffiths stressing in September that time was running out to save lives. The humanitarian response has intensified since then, but some 7.8 million people, or nearly half of Somalia's population, still need assistance, including 230,000 at serious risk of starvation, according to the UN. In other news, the Care for Humanity project reaches those in need in an orphanage in South Korea. Kristen Jewel Uyabut reports from Seoul.
Members of the Iglesia ni Cristo, or also known as Cristo Ekyohe in Korean, once again did a humanitarian activity here in Seoul, South Korea.
The church now reached out to an orphanage located in Yongsan, Seoul, named Yongnak Boringwon, which means protecting the neighborhood. The orphanage was established last 1939 by Pastor Han Kyung-jik from Sinai Jews Second Church. The main aim of its establishment is to take care of children who cannot grow with warm love of their parents. Over the past 70 years, 1,300 children have become independent and now living their own lives, and also become religious people living in a Christian way of life, like what they have learned in the orphanage. The children were also taught about their social responsibilities as a citizen of Korea. There are 7...
Sa araw pong ito ay isinagawa po sa aming distrito ang Care for Humanity Project. At ito po ay bilang pagsunod sa aral at utos ng Diyos at ng ating Panginoong Hesukristo na tulungan po ang mga nangangailangan. Kaya dito po sa aming distrito ay tuloy-tuloy po ang ginagawang pagtulong sa aming kapwa, sa mga kababayan, maging sa ibang lahi po, sapagkat ito ay pagtugon sa utos ng Diyos, kalooban ng Panginoong Hesukristo, at ito po ay pagtugon at pakikipagkaisa sa panawagan po ng ating tagapamahalang pangkalahatan, ang kapatid na Eduardo V. Manalo. Ang mga aktibidad pong ito ay susundan pa po ng mga magkakasunod pang mga aktibidad para maihayag ang patuloy na pagtulong sa kapwa, alang-alang po sa kanilang kapakanan. Sa mga nakaraan po ay isinagawa rin ang blood donation. Bahagi po ito ng pagtulong sa kapwa-tao.
네, 안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. 저는 영락보리는 원장 김병삼이라고 합니다. 오늘 여러분들께서 이렇게 좋은 선물 저희 친구들을 위해서 보내주셔서 감사드립니다. 이 선물들이 우리 친구들을 더 기쁘게 해주고 더 행복하게 해줄 수 있는 좋은 선물이 될 것 같습니다. 그리고 여러분들의 그 큰 따뜻한 사랑들이 우리 친구들이 자라나는 데 있어서 도와줄 수 있는 원동력, 또 자라나는 데 힘이 되는 역할이 될 수 있을 것 같습니다. 항상 저희 아이들 생각해 주시고 또 대한민국의 어려운 친구들을 위해서 많은 사랑을 베풀어 주시는 여러분들께 감사드립니다. 주님 안에서 늘 건강하시고 행복한 여러분들 되시기 바랍니다. 또한 우리 아이들도 주님 안에서 성장하는 아이들로 잘 키우도록 하겠습니다. 고맙습니다.
The Iglesia ni Cristo will continue its humanitarian activities in this country to also follow what has been taught in the church to help one another.
This is Kristen Jewel Uyabut, reporting from Seoul, South Korea. We live in extraordinary times.
Now, before we go on a break, they've been shadowboxing at separate campaign stops across the U.S. for weeks. But the Democratic and Republican leaders find themselves on the same battlefield Saturday as they make closing pitches in Pennsylvania for next week's midterm election. Let's listen in.
The election was rigged and stolen, and now our country is being destroyed. I ran twice. I won twice. and did much better the second time than I did the first. Getting millions more votes in 2020 than I got in 2016, and likewise, getting more votes than any sitting president in the history of our country by far. And now, in order to make our country successful and safe and glorious, I will very, very, very probably do it again, okay?
Putin's invasion of Ukraine sent gas prices soaring around the world. Because of actions we've taken dealing with the petroleum reserve and other things, prices are coming down here at home. They're now down $1.22 since their peak this summer. Folks, our economy continues to grow and add jobs even as gas prices continue to come down. But we got a lot more to do. But we also know folks are still struggling with inflation. It's our #1 priority. That's why, with Mike's help and Scott's help, I signed the Inflation Reduction Act to bring down the cost of everyday things that we talk about around the kitchen table. I'm working like hell to deal with the energy prices. I'm going to have a little, as I said, come to the Lord talk with the oil companies pretty soon.
Just a few miles east of Pittsburgh in Latrobe, Trump, the one-term 45th president with ambitions to return as the 47th, will seek to firm up support in a region that delivered him big margins in 2016 and 2020. Pennsylvania is seen as a must-win, not just for control of the Senate, but also for the balance of power among the country's 50 state governors, influential officials that weigh in on most aspects of voters' lives, from education and health care to voting rights. And with that, the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be back.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba, sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. May lalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Yung kilala ninyong superstar ngayon na Piolo Pascual ay...
I worked as a security guard.
Okay, hindi ako makapaniwala dito sa narinig ko. Never ka nagka-attitude. Dumating ba yung part na lumaki ang ulo mo?
Yeah, admittedly, yeah. The industry has some room for me, so why not stay?
Yay! He's staying! Mapapanood ka pa rin namin.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
So sa lahat ng mga marites na gusto malaman, bakit mukha pa rin bata si Piolo Pascual?
Cheers.
Okay? Cheers!
Dear Bossing, Poleng, and Cal. So yun na nga, grabe yung buhay na pinagdadaanan ng pinsan ni Jonah. Oh. Ay! Hindi po ako chismosa, Bossing. Hindi ko po kinakalat ang buhay ng iba sa ibang tao. Tama
Hoy,
yun!
Marites! Ano bang pinagkakalat mo sa kapitbahay? Na makalikot ang kamay ko at magnanakaw ako?
Hindi ko sinisiraan, no? Nagsasabi lang ako ng napapansin ko.
Love, Boss Leng and Tali. Tuwing linggo, alas 6 ng gabi dito lang sa Net25.
Panalo tayo pag together, walang talo pag together. Let's dance together sa Net25.
Fitness couple ba kamo? May tatalo pa ba sa mag-asawang ito?
Contract ko sa showbiz. Twice or 3 times a week na sa contract, mag-gym ako. Pinalagay ko talaga yun.
Especially now that we're getting older, it's very important to still stay active.
Pero bukod sa fitness, heart-to-heart talk din with Troy and Aubrey about life and parenting ang siguradong kapupulutan ng aral.
She's diagnosed with autism spectrum. Kasalanan ko ba to? Ako ba? Sabi ng doctor, it just happens. Yes. Walang reason and there's no cure but you can develop it.
Every child is like a blessing.
Tomorrow is another day. Go, Troy!
Bukas ×2.
Kita-kits sa linggo, dito lang sa Moments on Net25.
Panalo tayo pag together, walang talo pag together. Let's dance together sa Net25.
Marami ang nagulat sa atin kung paano ipagpapatuloy ang pag-aaral sa kasagsagan ng pandemya. Mabuti na lamang may mga kumpanya na matagal nang namumuhunan sa tinatawag na Learning Management Systems or LMS platforms tulad ng Kuiper Philippines. On this episode, let us educate ourselves on the ins and outs of educational technology through Yusuke Takagi, the CEO of Kuiper Philippines, and Anton Bailon, Head of Operations and Strategic Accounts of Kuiper Philippines.
Kuiper, actually, we built our LMS thinking with the Philippine school in mind.
When contents and LMS marry each other, we can provide new education like blended learning or personalized learning or adaptive learning, we call it.
Open for Business with Cesar Vallejos, Sunday, 9 p.m.
And we want to turn you over now back to the U.S., to politics and more of their economy following the takeover by Elon Musk. Twitter beginning massive job cuts and closing offices worldwide. It started on Thursday, U.S. time, when former Twitter employers started learning they've been laid off. Take a look.
So the only thing that I got officially from Twitter was an email, and that didn't really give any specific reason. So it sounds a bit strange to be fired for cause, but with no actual cause. So I'm still trying to find out what the actual reason is. So far it's mostly speculation. Most of the layoffs have been happening between yesterday evening and this morning, Pacific time. And what was, I don't know if it's atypical or if it's standard practice, but the only way people would find out would be not any phone call or any email from their employer or their boss, but just by seeing their their work laptop automatically reboots and just go blank. That's the way people would find out.
Now, amid the layoffs and complaints, Mr. Musk changed his bio this week to Twitter complaint hotline operator. Workers around the world were shown the door and took to Twitter to vent their frustration or disbelief and say goodbye to one of Silicon Valley's most iconic companies. Ahead of the layoffs, Twitter closed access to its offices worldwide, asking employees to stay at home to await news of their fate through an email. Meanwhile, class actions attorneys are reminding Mr. Musk that he must give employees 60 days notice under California and federal law. Take a look.
A WARN Act, you would need to get notification, and that's 60 days of notification. And the failure to provide that notification means that employees could be entitled up to 60 days of compensation, which also includes benefits. This is a highly unusual way to go about a layoff, particularly in Silicon Valley. Often in Silicon Valley, a lot of the tech companies won't want to make these as public and are much more afraid of negative PR than in this situation. Additionally, one of the things that if I were advising employees in this situation, I would be looking to who exactly is getting laid off. Is it whistleblowers? Is there any disparate effect on any particular demographics?
Saddled with the purchase of Twitter, for which Mr. Musk has said he overpaid, the tycoon is looking for ways for Twitter to make money and fast. His most recent idea was to charge $8 a month to anyone on Twitter who would receive a blue verified badge assuring the public that the account is authentic. Meanwhile, top global advertisers have already pulled back, including General Mills, Volkswagen, and General Motors, prompting Mr. Musk to tweet. Twitter has had a massive drop in revenue due to activist groups pressuring advertisers, even though nothing has changed with content moderation. And we did everything we could to appease the activists. Extremely messed up, he said. They're trying to destroy free speech in America. Officials and civil rights groups have expressed worry that Musk will open the site to uncontrolled hate speech and misinformation, as well as reinstate banned accounts, including that of former U.S. President Donald Trump. Advertisers are Twitter's main source of revenue, and Musk has tried to calm the nerves by reassuring that the site would not become a free-for-all hellscape. An extreme weather event coming out of the U.S., multiple tornadoes touching down across Texas. Take a look. The massive tornado bearing across Sulphur Springs, Texas, with another twister spotted hours before, while dangerous storms still tearing across the south. Weather.com reports that there are multiple reports of damage and injuries as tornadoes and storms ripped across parts of Texas and Oklahoma. More than 3 inches of rain, meanwhile, fell at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The previous record was 1.77 inches in 1956. According to CBS News, meanwhile, the Sheriff's Office for Lamar County, which includes Paris, reported late Friday night that at least 50 homes were either damaged or destroyed, and at least 10 people had been treated for injuries at a Paris hospital in connection with this storm. 2 were in critical condition. Tens of thousands also without power. Nearly 40,000 homes and businesses are without power in Texas, many in the northeast corner of the state, according to PowerOutage.us. Nearly 60% of the power customers in tiny Red River County, meanwhile, are experiencing outages. Video posted to social media showed heavy damage there. Indigenous people in Peru's Amazon detained a group of foreign and Peruvian tourists traveling on a riverboat to protest the lack of government aid following an oil spill in the area, according to local media. Take a look. We want to call the government's attention with this action. There are foreigners and Peruvians. There are about 70 people, according to Watson Trujillo, the leader of the Cuninico community, telling RPP Radio. The detained tourists include citizens from the United States, Spain, France, the United Kingdom, and Switzerland, and include women and children. Mr. Trujillo said his group had taken the radical measure in an effort to put pressure on the government to send a delegation to assess the environmental damage from the September 16 spill of 2,500 tons of crude oil into the Cuninico River. The detainees would spend the night inside the vessel while awaiting a solution to the situation, he added. Mr. Trujillo said he would return to the boat on Friday, U.S. time, to evaluate the possibility of releasing the tourists. In other news, former Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan accused his successor of involvement in a plot to kill him as he recovered in hospital from gunshot wounds following an assassination attempt. Mr. Khan told reporters that Shehbaz Sharif, who replaced him as premier following a vote of no confidence in April, masterminded the attack along with Interior Minister Rana Sanaullah and a senior army commander. Take a look.
What they were planning to do was to, first they whipped up a campaign that I was I had committed blasphemy or I was anti-religion or something. The ploy was to have me bumped off in the name of a religious fanatic. The whole thing was that they got hold of this guy who was a decoy. What happened was that there were two gunmen. One was this decoy who fired from the side, and it hit my legs. So as I was falling, the real guy was in the front in some building. And so as I was falling, these bullets went over my head. So there can be no investigation if the Prime Minister, the Interior Minister, and this ISI guy, Faisal, Major General Faisal, if these three are involved, there can be no independent investigation.
Now, the government has denied any part and blamed the assassination attempt on a lone assailant fueled by religious extremism. The attack on Khan's convoy killed one man and wounded at least 10, significantly raising the stakes in a political crisis that has gripped the South Asian nation since Khan's ousting. The 70-year-old former international cricket star had been leading a campaign convoy of thousands since last week from Lahore to the capital Islamabad, sitting in a wheelchair, his right leg in a cast and left leg heavily bandaged. Mr. Khan spoke for over an hour, railing against the government and establishment he accuses of unseating him. And fans of the Hong Kong Rugby Sevens shrugged off a 3-year pandemic absence as the weekend sporting spectacle kicked off with fancy dress and COVID rules. Teams from nations as far-flung as Samoa, Spain, and South Africa converge for one of Asia's biggest sports events, which Hong Kong bigwigs hope can prove that normality is on the way for the city. Take a look.
Amazing. It's such a buzz. It's so good that things are coming back to Hong Kong again. Yeah, it feels really good. Good. It's Friday night, so I feel like things are going to kick off on Saturday and Sunday more, but already you can feel like people are excited.
L'ambiance est sympa, Pour une fois, on n'a pas trop besoin de mettre le masque sur la tronche, donc non, c'est pas mal. Une bonne ambiance.
Now, Hong Kong maintains layers of pandemic restrictions long since abandoned by almost everywhere else in the world. Overseas arrivals are still banned from going to bars and restaurants for the first 3 days and must test regularly. All spectators must present negative virus test results to enter the stadium and have to wear a mask at all times except when eating or drinking. But Hong Kong-based fans were out in force, eventually filling about 3/5 of the stadium, and most were unmasked despite the best efforts of security guards waving signs telling people to cover up. Economists estimate that this year's tournament will bring in less than 300 million Hong Kong dollars, down from 400 million Hong Kong dollars in past years, according to the South China Morning Post. Last month, Hong Kong held a snooker tournament, which broke records for a live audience size, though it featured fewer overseas players than usual. Post-pandemic economic recovery and the ongoing crisis in Myanmar will be the main issues to be raised by President Marcos Jr. during his participation in the 40th and 41st Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN Summits, in Phnom Penh, Cambodia next week. In a press conference in Malacanang, the Department of Foreign Affairs said President Marcos will discuss the need to address international issues which hamper economic growth, including the pandemic, and how to address it. Take a look.
Okay, let me start probably with the foreign policy priorities of the president when it comes to ASEAN. Of course, at the top of the list is the post-pandemic economic recovery and transformation. So that would cover food security, energy security, digital transformation, and the digital economy, and also climate change, in as much as this is very much related to our disaster management efforts in the Philippines.
Mr. Espiritu also said The president will also push for the implementation of the ASEAN 5-point consensus to address the crisis in Myanmar. The consensus, which was issued by ASEAN in April 2021, calls for the immediate cessation of violence in Myanmar, as well as the deployment of a special ASEAN envoy in the said country. Last month, the president already committed to bring the representatives of the Myanmar junta to the negotiating table. However, the DFA official said the pending ASEAN Free Trade Agreement with the European Union, which has been pending since 2007, is unlikely to be discussed in the summits from November 8 to 13. Take a look.
The ASEAN EU FTA has started. The talk on that, the negotiations have started almost 10 years ago. But somewhere along the way, it's stalled. And up to this point, there's still no progress in that. And so far, there's no plan yet, or there's no concrete discussion yet on the resumption of such talks. Now, the coming ASEAN summit will be just an ASEAN summit. We'll have a separate commemorative summit in Brussels for ASEAN-EU in December. And I think that could be a good venue for a discussion on that, although there's nothing yet on the table as far as we are concerned today.
To Singapore, for example, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines, and Indonesia commenced negotiations on the FTAs. But the one that prospered was that of Singapore and Vietnam. And this track is also ongoing besides the discussion on supposedly the ASEAN EU FTA. We were informed that there were actually discussions that were raised this year for a resumption of this, and the ASEAN actually also did a counter proposal, but it's now it's still at the stage where there's ongoing discussions on it.
The 40th and 41st summits and related summits will be held in Phnom Penh, Cambodia next week. This year's ASEAN summits and related meetings chaired by Cambodia carry the theme ASEAN ACT, meaning addressing challenges together. The theme of the 40th and 41st summits and related summits emphasizes the ASEAN spirit of togetherness as one community and the common will to address and overcome challenges confronting the regional bloc. The 17th East Asia Summit, the 25th ASEAN Plus 3 Summit, and ASEAN Leaders Meeting with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres were among the high-level meetings that will be held during the 4-day event. And for the first time, the flag of the Philippines was raised in New York City as part of the commemoration of the Filipino-American History Month. Mayor Eric Adams and Consul General Elmer Cato led New York City officials and members of the Filipino community in this historic event at Bowling Green in Wall Street. Let's take a look.
This flag-raising ceremony marks the first time the Philippine flag is being raised outside the Philippine Consulate General in Midtown. And this is a recognition of the many contributions and achievements of Filipinos here in New York City. When New York City became the epicenter of the pandemic, Filipino nurses and other medical professionals stayed true to their oath to take care of the sick and the dying, sometimes at the expense of their very own lives. Today we honor the 30 Filipino doctors and nurses we lost during the pandemic, as well as other fallen heroes of New York City as we hoist the flags of both the United States of America and the Republic of the Philippines.
You provide a service to this country that we should all be proud of. And that's why here at Bowling Green, this cornerstone of our financial institution, for the first time, we're going to raise the flag of the Philippine community to send a loud and clear message that we're going to raise our spirits, we're going to raise our energy, we're going to raise the greatness of this city. But you can't only talk about being inclusive. You have to be about being inclusive. And what does that look like? First Filipino American to be a deputy mayor in the city of New York, the most important city in America. As she leads 124 years of independence, We have 70,000 Filipino Americans living in this city alone. That's political power and strength. I was telling the Council General I wanted one of the barong. I want to wear that when I'm in office.
And as you can see here, Mayor Eric Adams got his gift from Consul General Cato, where he gifted the mayor a barong. Mayor Eric Adams wore them in front of the crowd watching the flag ceremony. Mayor Eric Adams said in 1946, the Philippines established its diplomatic presence here in New York with the establishment of the Consulate General of the Republic of the Philippines. Today, Filipinos comprise the third largest Asian American population in the U.S. with over 4.5 million. And here in the country, the inflation rate further increased to 7.7% in October, almost a 1% jump from 6.9% recorded in September, according to the Philippine Statistics Authority. It was the highest inflation rate since December 2008. Take a look.
Ang pangunahing dahilan ng mas mataas na antas ng inflation nitong Oktubre 2022 kaysa noong nakaraang buwan ay ang mas mabilis na pagtaas ng presyo ng food and non-alcoholic beverages. Ito ay may 9.4% inflation at 80.9% share sa pagtaas ng pangkalatang inflation sa bansa.
Inflation rate.
Para sa isang mamimili, katulad nyo, I wish na ito na yung peak, ano? But of course, as your national statistician, nakikita natin yung mga datos, sabi ko nga, medyo may push tayo dito sa food prices, and of course itong recent typhoon ay hindi makakatulong, ano. So there is I could say from the using language of statistics, substantial probability na pwede pang tumaas by next month.
Prices in the transport sector, which factor in fuel prices and fares, rose in October. Transport fare hikes rose 9% as the national government approved petitions for increases last month to aid the sector reeling from inflation and expensive fuel prices. Inflation suppressed economic growth in the second quarter. And finally, in our news, our Net25 correspondent MJ Rocario got an exclusive interview with film actor Reggie Lee and his role. And he talked about his role in his new Netflix film. Take a look.
From Pirates of the Caribbean to All Rise, Filipino-American Hollywood actor Reggie Lee talks about his role in Lincoln Lawyer, a Netflix series. Take a look.
What happens is with Lincoln Lawyer, it's one case for the entire season. So she has a case, the guy that plays Mickey Haller has a case, and they are ex-husband and wife, right? Wow. So they're both attorneys. So she is coming after me the entire season. So you start to see little bits of me, and suddenly you see more and you see more and you see more until we get to the end. You know, I'm in court, I'm out of court, I'm back in court. So it was really fun. And also Ted Humphries is the wonderful, wonderful creator of this show. Well, not creator of the show. David E. Kelley is actually the one who penned this whole thing, but Ted Humphries was a showrunner. And he said, because there's Tagalog in it, right? So I said, I'd like to speak the Tagalog, but I'd like to speak English without an accent. Because I think we should be able to do both. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I don't want to go, I'm going to speak this with a fake accent. I would rather be able to speak Tagalog fluently and be able to speak English fluently. Because for us, I think that's better representation in terms of like where we are and what we can do, you know?
Absolutely.
And he said, you know what? I love that idea. You could have been born here. And then you went back there and spent some time in the Philippines and then came back here. And I said, that's fantastic. Let's do that. So the collaboration with Ted, and when he said that, I was like, that's great. I'm on board.
Any words of wisdom, life lesson, what you can share us to our audience?
Oh boy, you know, life is a roller coaster. And I think this comes off the top of my head. And I've been through, as we all have, so many ups and downs. Persevering is the most important part of life. And I think when you persevere and you go, this too shall pass, there's going to be a greater time. Keep forging ahead with the passion of what you want to do. And for us, it's promoting the Filipinos and promoting the Filipino Americans. So if you have a dream out there, persevere. When you're having downtime and a low time, know it's going to get better, because it always will. So go always to the passion and to the love and the happiness, and you will be fine.
Thank you so. That's beautiful. That's well said.
Some Duyas.
Why?
They worked out of my car.
But that's not why you're here. Jerry Vincent left you as practice, including the Trevor Elliott trial.
People are dead. Maybe you and I are next.
That is it for our entertainment news. Always tune in to Net25 because we live in an extraordinary times.
Thank you, MJ. As always, I'll end the week on a thoughtful note. Our ability to look back and smile at our past is proof that God's plan is to keep us moving forward. This has been Eagle News International. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay alert, stay informed, because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.